Good morning, friends. This is John Finnegan, and I'm here again with my friend Tez Steinberg. And for those of you who saw our interview last May 12th, he was in preparation for an amazing journey from California to Hawaii. He created a nonprofit called the United World Challenge. And I love the vision statement, Tez, that you created. So solo rowing the Pacific from California to Hawaii to inspire a more courageous world and also to raise scholarships for the United World Colleges. So thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me back, Sean.
You survived.
I did. There were some hairy moments, but in the end I made it.
I know you did. So for those who weren't able to see that and don't know about what you accomplished, could you go back to the beginning and talk about how this began and what transpired?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to ensure folks have the context here, we're talking about rowing a 23-foot boat from California to Hawaii, solo and self-supported. So I carried everything with me for the 71 days that it took and didn't see anyone the whole time. And before this project, I wasn't a rower. So to get to John's question of how did I get to this point, well, I decided to row across an ocean in 2016 and was looking for some way to really add value to my life and other people's lives. It was a hard year. My fiance and I broke up. My father passed away, and I wanted to make my life count. So I happened to come across ocean rowing that year and decided I would row across an ocean. And then it became a question of, well, this is a great opportunity to inspire other people. And it took some time to dial in exactly what that would mean, how I would deliver on that mission. But in the end, it became a question of raising scholarships to the United World Colleges, where I was lucky to get a scholarship myself when I was 16. I can share more about that experience later. That was one part of the mission. And the other is raising awareness about ocean conservation and action to protect our oceans, and formed a partnership to end up collecting funding the collection of nearly 200,000 ocean-bound plastic containers, all the while sharing the story across the ocean to inspire people. So obviously it included a lot of physical training, a lot of mental training, learning the basics of rowing. And personally, one of the biggest challenges was around the operations of it and financing it, because I had a boat built, secured a lot of life support equipment. It's basically a spaceship for the ocean with full life support systems. So the project cost over $200,000, and it took me years to get everything together with corporate sponsors and a crowd fund. But we can dive into each of those pieces. I'm grateful to be back and share the story.
Yeah. Were there any surprises? There were many surprises. I know. I watched the videos as you were on this journey. What were some of the biggest ones that we should be aware of?
Gosh, it's ironic to say this and a little embarrassing, but the first surprise was just how hard it was, because obviously it's hard. And I felt so silly, bouncing around my cabin, scared to go outside, getting used to the rough waves, and honestly feeling really depressed the whole first month. And just thinking to myself, gosh, did I even read my own website? I say in big letters, solo rowing to Hawaii is really hard. And here I am surprised that it's really hard. But I think that speaks to what it's like to be an entrepreneur.
Yes.
Because you'll pick something that's really hard, but you won't think, you'll mitigate all the risks, but you won't think about all the downsides other than just how to kind of, you'll deal with them when you get to them. And you prepare enough, but don't let that be a reason not to do it. But I had a bit of a reckoning when I was out there with what that really means.
Yeah. I likened it to when I created my first company in 1989, sort of like when we're young, getting married, we really have no idea what we're getting into until we're there. And so you knew beforehand that it wasn't just physical, that the emotional piece of this would be really draining and really difficult.
I did, but it's very hard to prepare for that.
Mm-hmm.
I did a meditation retreat, spent several days alone. Loved that. It's one thing to do that in a lovely cabin and sit on a cushion and feel a little bit physically uncomfortable, but ultimately have a nice little getaway. And a very different thing to be out feeling incredibly vulnerable, worried about survival, and thinking, what the heck did I do? Because there's not much of a way out.
Yeah.
So I had done a lot of mental preparation, but it's just a totally different beast once I was out there.
Right. But it really does speak to leadership. I mean, so, I'm thinking of people that I know that, have thousands of employees. And before they were in that position, they had no idea what it would be like and how demanding it would be.
Mm.
So did the journey take longer than you expected? In other words, did you plan for 23 days and it took something longer or shorter?
It was right in the ballpark of what I expected. The world record is 52 days for the crossing. I took 90 days of food, thinking it would take me somewhere between 60 and 90, and it took 71. So I was right in the middle there. I did spend about 4 or 5 days in the first week not rowing because conditions were really difficult. I spent some other days not rowing because I was making equipment repairs, and other days not rowing in the first month because I was just depressed. And
Yeah.
so in total, I probably spent 7 or 8 days not rowing out of that 71.
Wow.
And so I could have gone a lot faster if I had a little more prep, but I basically only had 3 days to train before I got in the boat.
Yeah.
We talked in May. The
Right.
virus was running across the country. I got out to find my boat finished at the very end of May,
Yeah.
and fit in some quick training in June, and then hit the water in July. And so it was trial by fire. And as a result, there were, I definitely could have gone a little bit faster, but no regrets by any means. The 71 days was perfect in the end.
One of the big things was the track for your seat, which was so critically important in rowing. It broke, and I remember in some of the videos you trying to piece it together and lubricate it. Was that the biggest obstacle, or did you have something larger?
Well, that was the biggest first order obstacle. The second order obstacle as a result of that is my own doubts. Can I fix this? Will
Right.
I be able to? There was a technical challenge of figuring out how to take care of this seat that was falling apart. For those folks, to get folks up to speed, a seat, the bolt on one of my wheels on the seat snapped on, I think,
Yeah.
day 15.
Wow.
And I had already used my one spare bolt of that length to repair something else
Mm-hmm.
that broke in the first week in rough weather.
Right.
And so I didn't have the equipment I needed to make this seat work as it was intended. And the
Right.
seat is essential to row.
Yes.
So it became a question of, do I have the creativity, the wherewithal to make this work one way or another and continue to row another 2,000 miles on a really broken seat? And that was a massive test of faith because I was rowing farther and farther out to sea. When it first broke, I could have arranged a rescue mission, got brought back to land, and not had any risk of losing my boat and my investment, and I could try again next year. If my seat broke without repair in the middle of the ocean and I had to get rescued by a passing vessel, I'd have to abandon my boat, which means walking away from a huge investment and
Yes.
not really having much opportunity to make up for it. And so it was a massive emotional and mental challenge to commit myself to keeping going.
Right.
And I'd say that was the bigger challenge than actually figuring out what to do with the seat. That evolved, and I came up with lots of different solutions. But it was the biggest challenge was inside me.
Yeah. So how did you fix it?
You want to see it?
Yeah,
I've got the seat right here.
that'd be great.
Yeah, it's right here in my closet. So perfect. I've got a couple things I can show you here. Got one of my pairs of shoes from the ocean, nice and worn out with some nice big holes. And I have a number of things that I use to fix it. So
what kind of shoes are they, Tez?
these are Nike. I want to say Freeze. Oh, they're one of the Nike Flex. I think they're Nike Flex.
What are they designed for?
They're very flexible. They're technically marketed as a running shoe, but they don't have any support. They're a terrible, terrible running shoe.
It's almost like barefoot running.
They're very barefoot running, but there's barefoot running with better fit.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend these at all, but they're fantastic as slippers. You slip them on, slip them off. So they worked great for me. I brought 2 pairs. This is the second pair, which you might not believe me, but is it the pair that's in better shape? But so this is my rowing seat. It slides back and forth on a track.
Yeah.
So that I can use my legs, because most of the propulsion comes from the legs and the back. Now, what happened is the bolt on this wheel snapped. So you can see there's a frame, this aluminum frame here. This bolt going through this wheel would go through to the other side.
So it looks like there are two tracks, one horizontal, they're perpendicular to each other.
Exactly. There's a horizontal track that the seat rests on.
Yes.
And then there's a wall that this rolls along so that the seat doesn't
guide
wobble, right?
Mm-hmm.
This bolt broke. The other bolts bent. What I ended up doing was using shorter bolts, and then I was trying to stabilize them. I had pieces of wood stuffed in. You can see on the back side here, there's wood inside the frame to keep this bolt from wobbling, right? So I was cutting pieces of scrap wood to reinforce it. In the end, I realized, you know what? I don't need to do that. I don't need to remake bearings from scratch, which was helpful. I melted down plastic to remake bearings because the bolts bent. After I replaced these bolts with shorter ones, it worked, but the seat was lopsided.
Yes.
So then bolts on the other side were bending and then completely eating through the bearings, turning my bearings to dust. So I made new bearings from scratch, did all these different things. In the end, I realized, you know what? I can actually just lock the wheels down. So the wheel what I ended up doing is just tightening the bolt so much that it doesn't roll.
Yes.
It doesn't spin.
Right.
And then I took coconut oil, of which I had like 4 gallons, mostly for food. It was to eat, but it became a lifesaver because I just poured that onto the track and then slid back and forth.
Yes.
And be a little hard to see, but maybe you can see on this one, if I get the angle right, the wheel is actually slightly flattened.
How far along in the journey were you when this happened? Because I've forgotten.
The first bolt broke on like day 15, so early. It wasn't until August 14th or 15th that I remade the bearings from scratch, and that was the day I realized one way or another I'll make it.
Yes.
Now that's like more than 5 weeks into the trip.
Yeah.
And so there was a solid 3-4 weeks where I was just every day racked with worry, and also having to make the conscious choice of, I can continue to think about what my next fix will be, because there is some value in preparation and thinking ahead and brainstorming, but it also is exhausting to be thinking, what will I do if it breaks again? And so I had to make a conscious choice not to think about it and say, I'll deal with it when I get to it. And right now I'm just going to enjoy this experience, because it's like life. We could spend all day worrying about what happens with our business, and we should prepare, but we can't let that get in the way of enjoying the experience in the meantime.
Right. So the company that built this boat for you, this isn't the first boat of its kind for them. Was the seat something new that they had not experienced before? What?
Never experienced. That's totally unheard of for one of these bolts to break. It's the highest kind of steel bolt, the highest quality steel bolt you can get. They've built 7 of these boats before, or mine was the 7th. Never has this issue occurred. Part of it was my fault.
Yeah.
In the first week, some of my hatches flooded on deck in rough weather. I didn't know enough when the boat was listing to the side that it was listing because my hatches were flooded, because I was so new to the boat. I thought it was listing because the wind and waves were coming from the opposite side, which was true, but it wasn't enough to have the boat listing so much. As a result, I spent several days rowing with flooded hatches, putting way more effort on one oar and that side of the seat. So partially it was the conditions, partially it was me being a total novice, and partially I think we had a bad batch of bolts, because there were some that were just like, they shouldn't bend no matter how much pressure goes on them, and they shouldn't seize and snap. So it was a kind of perfect storm of bad bolts and novice mistakes.
I was very much aware of that issue. What other issues happened along the way that we should know about?
Well, the very first week when I was on para anchor, which is an underwater parachute that stabilizes the boat in rough weather, while I was on that, a pelican case in my cabin, not my bow cabin where I sleep, but the stern cabin in the back,
Yes.
came loose, bounced up, and snapped the carbon tiller arm that controls my rudder. So it's kind of funny because I'm hearing it happened pretty early on, probably like day 3 or 4, when I was on this para anchor, and I was on the anchor from 3 to 7, days 3 to 7. So I'm hearing this bang, bang, bang in the opposite end of the boat, but I'm so new to the boat. I'm like, I don't know what that is. And I'm too scared to go and look.
Right.
And like, I'll figure it out later. I come to realize that was actually my rudder swinging freely, banging against the back of the boat for days and days. And I mean, imagine you're just hearing like
Right.
constantly reverberating around. And so the sound was driving me mad. And then I finally realized what it was. Well, that's what I used the spare bolt for my seat for, was to fix that tiller arm, that carbon tiller piece.
Kind of important.
Yeah, that happened
Want to
early on.
arrive at a particular destination.
But you know what's interesting, John? When I found that broken tiller arm on day 7,
Yeah.
I was actually relieved, because at that point I was looking for a reason to quit.
Yes.
I was so tired of bouncing around my cabin. I was covered in bruises.
Yeah.
I had to wear a helmet and be strapped down in my bunk whenever I was at any time. It's the only position to be in, because the boat was bouncing around. And I just thought, I'm so unprepared. I have no business being out here. Here is something that broke. That's not my fault. I don't have a spare tiller arm. I can save face. I'm close enough to land that the Coast Guard can come and rescue me. Doesn't cost me anything. And it's not my fault.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Sure.
Now, I called the woman who built the boat, who founded the boat building company.
Yes.
She was my duty officer. She was giving me advice on weather and routing and what to do at all different situations. She's rowed the
Yes.
Atlantic before.
You weren't a sailor before.
I was not a sailor or rower.
So she was your sailor on land, providing you with guidance.
Yeah, we call her the duty officer.
Okay.
So we were in touch by satellite phone. So I call her up and I say, Sonia, bad news. My tiller arm broke. She goes, it's fine. We can fix it. My heart sank a little further. I was like, damn it. Like, I don't want to
I've got to
fix it.
keep going.
Yeah. She's like, get out your hardware kit, get out your spares. I got to hang up because she's at work. She has a day job. She's like, text me. And so she's, says, look for the longest threaded hex bolt you have. So long threaded bolt with a hex nut at the end.
Yep.
Hex being, something like this, where, right. And she's like, get out your epoxy. And what we ended up doing was epoxying that bolt into the snap tiller arm to then thread through the rudder and then thread down a lock nut on the back side of that hex bolt on the outside of the rudder. So it just reinforced, it replaced the broken piece. So she coached me through all of that. We got it going. And I called her up. I said, hey, I fixed it. Well, actually, I said, hey, Sonia, I fixed it. And she goes, you don't sound very happy. I'm like, I'm not happy. And she starts coaching me through. She's like, it's normal at this stage to want to quit. It feels better to admit it. If you admit it, go for it, and I won't judge you. It's your choice. And, but she said, just keep an open mind and try and take things one day at a time. So the next day, I decided, let me just have an open mind. Can I enjoy today? And I started taking things one day at a time. And I said, I can quit, but not today. Can I just make today a good day?
Right. I want to come back to the emotional part of this thing, because it was huge. It made, I don't know, you're an endurance athlete. You tell me, was it different than like running a marathon or a 100-mile race or an Ironman? How is it similar? How is it different than those kinds of experiences?
Having done all those things, I can tell you there's really no comparison. It's so different. You can get off the ride on any of those events. You're always within safety. You be pushing yourself physically, and there's a different element with those of competition against other people. It's often a race. In my case, there was none of that. And so there's different internal foes and adversaries, right? Early on, especially in difficult conditions, rowing doesn't go, it's not fast. It's not a fast means of travel. So I had to get over the very dangerous voice in my head that said, don't bother rowing. You're not going anywhere fast anyway. And
Right.
those days where I just gave into that and I was like, I'm going to take a rest day because I was adapting to doing this every day, which is also different from a 100-mile race. That's 24 hours, maybe 30 hours. I was doing this day after day after day for months. So there's this voice inside me that says, take the day off, you deserve it. But sitting around the cabin all day doesn't actually make me feel better, you know? To an extent, it helped my body adjust to the new demands. But the hardest part is that voice in my head that said, stop, which is not a voice I had in any triathlon, in any marathon, a couple ultra marathons, like a 145-mile race. I wanted to quit in that event, and my team helped me keep going. But there was one low point, and we got back going. This is different. You can have low point again and again and again, day after day,
Yeah.
and it just required a whole different set of tools and resilience to get through it.
Boy, this conversation, first of all, I appreciate your vulnerability, your honesty about this, because you're accessible, Tez. That I learned about you last May. And in this conversation, and I think as you talk to leaders and use this as an example of how to overcome difficult challenges, it feels 99% psychological and
Mhm.
1% physical. Am I off the mark there?
No, that's spot on. To be honest, going back, there's something I do differently. I'd probably do less physical training. Now, it's
Wow.
easy to say I'd do less, but what is that threshold of less? It was great that my body wasn't the main limiting factor. If
Yeah.
it was, that would just have made it harder.
Yes.
So I don't know that I necessarily overtrained,
Yeah.
but it wasn't my body saying, typically, you need a break. The first few weeks, there was definitely some adjustment.
Yes.
Um, and over time, tendonitis set in my hands, and there was some serious pain at points. But the biggest issues were by far psychological and emotional, and at the lowest point of the row, when I attempted to fix the seat for the second time with what I hoped would be a permanent fix, and what I discovered was that it would be a very temporary fix, and I would be required to fix it again and again and again. And I doubted that I could. I doubted that it could be fixed by anyone, let alone
Right.
me.
Yes.
Um, I called my brother and just broke into tears after spending the entire day working on fixing this thing. And I didn't row all day. I worked on the seat from like 8 a.m. until about 4 p.m. when I called him, and just broke down. And having someone to call and listen to, and who can offer just some simple advice, like first listen to you and then say, well, you haven't done any rowing yet today. If you can row, just row for like an hour. Move a little bit, create a little bit of movement when you're feeling stuck. And that kind of a thing where it looks like I'm alone in the boat, and I am. But that satellite phone and having someone I can call made a huge difference. And I think that's the same situation. If you're a CEO, it can be a very lonely position, but
Right.
who's that person you're going to be able to call?
Hmm. So you said maybe I would have done a little bit less. I would have not emphasized the physical piece of it, but how would you have prepared psychologically? What
Mm.
could you have done differently to prepare for that piece of it?
It's really hard to say, John. I think, the big thing I would do differently if I could is just more time in the boat. That wasn't
Mhm.
really feasible without
So that you would have a
having
greater understanding, less of a surprise. Mhm.
of all the different things, not just the boat's mechanics, but at the same time, I'm doing my best to film this experience,
Yes.
take photos and videos, upload them in real time, and also shoot longer clips to go into a documentary.
Yes.
And trying to solve these problems while also trying to film them
Yes.
was a double challenge,
Right.
and just more experience with the equipment that I'm using.
Yeah.
Uh, what practically though, what does that mean? It's very hard to think what I would have actually done differently rather than what I would have liked to have done differently,
Right.
because I was doing the best that I could leading up to this thing with all of the logistics, fundraising, securing equipment bit by bit, and also giving myself a little bit of breathing room to have a personal life when I could,
Right.
like have a relationship and not only be doing my day job and the row. And
Right.
so there were things that would have helped, but in the end, I feel like I don't know, I'll have to think about that more, specifically what I could have done differently,
Yeah.
uh, given the circumstance.
Yeah. What about restorative sleep?
Mm,
Because I held off on asking you that question because I wanted to take a deeper dive in the psychological component, but that is hand in hand with the physical. You've got to get restorative sleep in order to perform, in order for you to be psychologically able to accomplish this mission. So here you are strapped in, even in your cabin, you're having to wear a helmet. Did you sleep at all? I mean, how did that work?
I slept decently the first couple of weeks. I got in the boat more tired than I had been in years. I didn't take a day off in 6 weeks leading up to it,
Yes.
just with so much stuff that needed to get finished with the boat in Washington, bringing it down to California, getting it into the water in San Francisco, then realizing there wasn't going to be a weather window for launch, getting it out of the water, bringing it down to Monterey, and then finally launching.
Yes.
So when I launched, it was on the back of, I had done like 5 workouts in 2 months. So I felt physically out of shape compared to how I'd been,
Mhm.
mentally and emotionally so strained because I hadn't been sleeping well or enough in ages
Yes.
and just not having taken any breaks. So to be honest, that first week when I was stuck on para anchor, it was traumatic, but actually I slept okay. I was finally catching up on some sleep.
Mm.
And as the row went on, I actually slept worse and worse. Um, I just my skin was uncomfortable. The mat that I was sleeping on was salty and uncomfortable,
Right.
and um, I was feeling more comfortable in the ocean and with what I needed to do as each week went by. But I slept worse. Uh, Part of that is just the breakdown of the body, and there, even while sleeping, I'm not genuinely resting. I have to prop my legs up to keep myself from rolling. So my legs are actually actively engaged even while sleeping. There's never a rest. Um, if I'm laying down and I'm not securing myself with my knee under my electrical cabinet and my other leg bracing me, I'll roll around. So that's not comfortable. The other position is to be in my cabin kneeling. Well, then I'm engaging my legs and my core as well. So there's really no resting. And that's just part of the experience. It's a managing the breakdown, getting some sleep, and being wise about when to use that rest. It meant that there's no way to escape the heat. It might be tempting to hide from it, but really it's just embracing it, being out on the deck in the hottest part of the day, not being in the cabin until the sun got behind the cabin door. So I could open the cabin door, be in the shade with some cool air. And probably the most like relaxed I would be is when I would take my afternoon break and later on in the row. My routine was basically row for 7 hours straight, approximately. When I wake up in the morning, row from just before sunrise until early afternoon when the sun was behind the cabin. And then I'd go into the cabin, have my first big meal. I have shakes and some other snacks throughout the morning, but I have my first big meal in the shade and finally feel cool.
Mhm.
And even though I wasn't sleeping, that that feeling of I've made it through the hardest part of the day. Now
Yes.
I can relax, I can eat, I can write a little blog. That was really restorative, getting to that point every day.
Yeah.
But physically, it's just managing the breakdown. And then once I got to land, it was dealing with all of that, and it took months to recover.
Mm. Yeah. Are you intending to write a book?
I am, I am not just about this journey. I
Mm.
can't give the full details yet, but in mid 2021, I'll make an announcement about the next adventure, and I expect the book will be a review of the whole journey.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, that'll be something for us to look forward to.
Thank you.
Um, you are on a leave of absence right now from Deloitte, and your plan is to go back to work soon. And leadership and development is an area of interest to you. And so any final thoughts on that for us?
Well, it's just such an empowering topic. I couldn't have achieved what I've achieved, and I don't view it as just a personal achievement. I had a huge
I
team
know you
support,
don't. Yeah.
right?
It,
Um,
it really
even
requires a team.
even that word, like when I think back to the experience of being out there, it
Yeah.
feels more like a privilege that I was lucky to have to get to be out in the ocean for that long.
Yeah.
But in terms of the accomplishment, that is only possible because of what I've learned in myself, the tools and techniques I applied, understanding how to work with others, understanding how to take things one step at a time. Some of it is tactical, I can quit, but not today. Some of it is much more deeper spiritual kinds of techniques, but they've changed my life. And I want to offer these tools to other people. And so that's the next frontier for me professionally is both sharing this through the United World Challenge and giving public talks and so forth, and also through my professional work with Deloitte.
You raised over $76,000. And so I'm sure there will be many students who will benefit from the scholarship, and the nonprofit will continue. What can we do to help you?
Thank you, John. Donations to the scholarship fund would be fantastic. So we've raised $76,000, as you said. This goes to provide full scholarships to students attending the United World College of the USA, which takes students from 85 countries for a high school experience to create a peaceful and sustainable future. I had one of these experiences and I wouldn't be here today if not for that.
Right.
And so folks who want to help can help pay that experience forward. You can go to unitedworldchallenge.org, click the donate page and make a gift.
Fantastic. Um, yeah, you can't talk about what's next yet because you're formulating that, but you will go back to work and you're going to apply that which you have learned. And I think, especially for those of us as individuals, but also for teams. And
Exactly.
yeah,
That's right.
did you have an opportunity to use that 360-degree camera? Did that work at all? And do you have any shots?
Yeah, I did. That was fantastic. Let me show you one more thing.
Okay.
I have right here a 4K 360 headset. So I'm the first person in the
Oh
world to shoot
yeah.
360 videos of the open ocean. By the way, behind me is a photo of my arrival in Hawaii. I'll show you that
That's
photo in
great.
a moment. But with this headset, you can actually experience what it's like to be in the boat. So I was able to shoot some really cool videos. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome, and I'm looking forward to that. Look, I've got 1,000 more questions, but I want to be respectful of your time. And so know that you have an open invitation to speak to my groups. And we'll talk more about that in the future. But I wanted to say to you, congratulations for what you've achieved. I'm so glad that you made it safely. I know it was tough, but we're so grateful for what you have done.
Thank you, John. I appreciate your support and I look forward to connecting with you and your community again soon.
Thanks, Tez. Bye for now.
Cheers.